And we're live. Hi, guys. Welcome back to Empathy and Automation, where we are focusing on how to stay human centered in a tech obsessed world. I'm Sharon Steed. I'm a keynote speaker and empathy consultant and a person who stutters. It's a wonderful Tuesday after the long weekend, and I'm excited to be back at it. And I'm so excited to be talking to my friend Abadesi. Girl, how are you? How have you been?
Thank you so much for having me, Sharon. I'm really good. I'm excited to be here talking to you. And yeah, I always enjoy all of your content on empathy. I feel like now more than ever, this is really lacking in the workplace. I think a lot of people are feeling it, regardless of your identity, your lived experience. So, really excited to create some space to talk about this topic and hopefully increase like hope and inspiration for people at work today.
You know what? I love that, right? I mean, all of the things I do, I try to just come from a place of like, how can we make people feel like a little bit of inspiration? How can we give people hope? And so I'm glad that you called that out.
For
So,
sure.
can you give just people a little bit of a background on you, how you got to where you are, what you're doing now, just all the things?
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. So I've worked in tech for a long time, I think like about 10 years or so. I started my career in startups, a little startup called Groupon, their London office, a year before the IPO. And from there, I worked at Amazon, onto Hotel Tonight and Product Hunt. And yeah, for the last few years, I've been focused on my own community, Hustle Crew, which I started as a response to my experience navigating the tech industry as a woman of color. I just felt like there were very few people like me at the table, and I was very concerned about what the real life societal impact of that was. I feel like I was seeing a lot of stories coming out about Apple Watches not working on dark skin and autonomous vehicles not recognizing dark skinned pedestrians. And Hustle Crew was my response to making the tech industry more representative of the society that it serves. And I just feel that all of my work focuses on that now. Like, how can I use my voice and how can I use my platform to make teams, in tech, but also beyond, more
Mhm.
diverse, more inclusive. So yeah, we design talks and training for employers that align with this mission. And I also have my own podcast, Techish.
I love your podcast. I've seen a lot of clips of it. You
Thank
and your
you.
co-host, I forgot his name. I'm so sorry.
Michael.
You guys are so good together. He's so funny. Like
Thank you.
it's just like a really good, like awesome podcast. And I
Thank
love
you.
when there's no episodes. So I would love to hear about what your experience has been like with your business over the past 8 months. Just because I
Mm,
feel like there's been a little bit of change in the way
a little
we
bit,
view
just a little
diversity,
bit.
equity, and inclusion. Yeah, and so I would love to hear like what kinds of things you're hearing from companies in terms of, are they continuing to be excited about investing in these programs? Are they a little bit more concerned about it? Are they concerned to not do it? Like, I would just be interested to hear what your experience has been.
So I love this story because I feel it paints a full picture, not just from our perspective, but from our client's perspective. There was like a really large company in the tech sector, like in a very specific niche of tech, and they were global offices in the US, Europe, but their headquarters were in San Francisco, like many tech companies. And we were
Mhm.
dealing with the HR director who was getting really excited about engaging us in some training on gender bias, race bias, disability bias, all the different types of unconscious bias that unfortunately can create a lot of like uncomfortable moments at work, can make people feel unsafe at work. And the day after the US election results were announced, she emailed us and said, we have to put everything on hold because of this new, geopolitical landscape we're heading into. We don't want to be targeted because, the last time Trump was in power, he made it, his mission to stop DEI efforts. And we're just really worried about being targeted. We don't want to lose any federal support. We don't want to lose any grants. And, I use that as an example of like how, palpable the change was overnight from people who were really excited to suddenly very afraid. So,
Mm.
that's one way in which we've been affected. Like there are people who see this work as a risk that they're not willing to take. And that shows that you don't need to make something illegal for it to stop. You can just create the threat, or you can just create like the ideology, and that is enough to make people stop doing the work. I think another thing that we have observed is in the current economy, tech companies are not making as much money as they used to. I mean, to be honest, their shareholders are very happy, but employees less so. So because of all the restructurings and the redundancies, we've actually seen a lot of the teams that we used to typically partner with cut or just shut down, whether that's a DEI team, an ethics team, or anything like that. So it's a much more challenging market than we saw before. But on the other side of the coin, there are companies who are really like undeterred by the geopolitical changes, and who even in a challenging economy still really value the culture that they're building for people and see the benefit of making work a place for everyone to thrive and feel safe. So we also are really fortunate to work with other companies who are like, we didn't do this because it was trendy or a fad. We did this because it was like our core values and what we care about. So yeah, it's a really mixed bag, but I would definitely say the work is harder than it was, let's say 8 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, because it now happens in a place where hostility to the work is really welcome. And I think that's why like your empathy content is so relevant for me. I feel that like empathy has kind of like flatlined a little bit. Like it's
Mm.
really at rock bottom, and where there was an openness to understanding different perspectives and different opinions, and having patience and pausing and following our curiosity, there's now more of a willingness to shut things down and justify and defend the status quo instead of interrogate what could be problematic about the status quo. Why don't we have more different voices at the table? Why aren't we more accessible? Why aren't we more inclusive? We know these things are possible. Why is it not the default? And where there was space to ask those questions and have a really interesting conversation about historical reasons and systemic reasons, there now is a hostility. Why are you attacking me? Or why are we being negative? And it's like, it's not negative. It's just a conversation. So that's a big shift that I've seen. I'm curious if you've observed this as well.
So, okay, so I focus on communication, and I focus on empathy. And so I've just been and like, I know this is going to sound horrible. I've been trying to not talk about inclusion while also talking about inclusion, right?
Yeah.
You know, because like all of my content is basically about how do we continue to have productive and positive conversations where we can like learn about each other, just be exposed to like people's different experiences and like use those experiences and their stories to improve productivity, to improve products, and to improve services, right? But that's basically how do we create an inclusive environment, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm talking about inclusion while like not talking about it. And so overall, I mean, I feel like my barometer is my courses on LinkedIn. I have a course that's called Communicating with Empathy, and then I have a course that's called Thriving Inclusion with Empathy. And I feel like I saw a little bit of a dip around the beginning of the year, and now all the views are beginning to go back up. So I feel like we are at a place where I think a lot of people are, a little bit afraid of, having those conversations, or even pretending to be like invested in or interested in, talking about inclusion or diversity. However, I feel like we are going to continue to go back to like, well, but I still like want to have real conversations with my coworkers as a way to create a better product because like if I can't create really good products, then I'm not going to be successful. And if I'm not successful, I'm not going to have a job. And so that's just kind of like what I've seen is that we are eventually going to get back to it. But I also, am aware like that over time, like it isn't just going to be like an like overall like overnight change of like, well, now all DEI is gone. Like, no, like I know it takes time to really chip away at things. And so I feel like we are kind of pulling tack. However, it's just the way that we talk about it, I think, has to shift. Like, I think when we talk about inclusion, we, this is going to sound really crazy, we have to include everybody in those conversations. And that's why I've always appreciated that, I focus on like, no, like every person in your team, in your office, has a very different experience than you, even if they are a white, cis person. Like their experience is going to be important. And so it's why I've always gone back to like, we need to be focusing on things that don't talk about inclusion, but are inclusive. So that's kind of been my view of the whole thing. I mean, yeah, I mean, it feels like we're kind of like in a little bit of a cluster at the moment.
Mm.
But, I don't know. I mean, I'm interested to see where this industry is going to go, especially as like we get a lot more into the automation of it all, right? Like AI really is going to change how all of us work in every single way that we work. And so, like, I would love to hear what
Mm.
empathy and automation, like, so how do you define that as a person who works like at the intersection of tech and inclusion?
I
Just be
yeah,
interested to hear.
I think it's like a huge question, and it's something that we've tackled on Techish before because I almost feel that like automation is something which I love, but which I also have like a very like complicated relationship with. So on a personal
Mhm.
level, I'm using these tools all the time, whether it's, using chat gpt to plan a vacation for me, whether it's like doing a quick little bit of research on perplexity, getting a little bit of whatever sense check from um, Claude, you name it. I was on Grok earlier today. I'm using them all, right? I'm using them
Mhm.
all. And one of the things that I am often conflicted about isn't even what you might think at, a top level, like, oh, AI is going to come for people's jobs, even though, if you look at the McKinsey Women in the Workplace report that came out, they talked about the fact that the jobs most affected by AI initially, from like customer support to administration, are already disproportionately women's roles. So in a way, like
Interesting.
women are more affected by the automation of jobs. I think what makes me conflicted about it is the way that automation has been packaged to us in the West, and how dehumanized it is, specifically in the sense of like we don't think about the workers in less economically developed countries who are actually plugging in the data. I'm talking about like OpenAI centers in Kenya, and like I'm thinking about the disproportionality in terms of like what those individuals are being paid to like what we pay in the subscription for the product. And it reminds me of all the news stories that were coming out of like The Verge almost 10 years ago about moderators for Meta and Facebook, and the conditions under which these moderators were working, and having to ask to go on a break and being, subjected to all this violent, horrible footage. And yeah, I think I have very conflicted views when you say empathy and automation, because my immediate thought is, where is the empathy for the people that make this automation possible? And I don't mean the engineers in Silicon Valley. I
Of
mean like
course,
the
yeah.
individuals who are parsing through the data and testing them. So that's my first thought, where is the empathy for them? And I think very intentionally, a lot of these AI companies, make us forget that those people exist, and they don't want us to think about them, and they don't want us to think about the conditions under they're working, because then we have to start thinking about the the fairness and the equity and the environmental impact of automation. We don't want to think about that. We don't want to think about how much the carbon footprint of my ChatGPT usage is right now. I don't want to think about that, right? And so I don't have to think about that. And that's great. And that's amazing. But yeah, I think the empathy thing first goes there. Like what does automation mean in terms of how I use the resources of the world in line with my values, and also how I exploit the people in this chain, of production, and how do I feel about that? And then it comes to the more headline grabbing story, which is, do I feel complicit in the stealing of jobs? Like, am I part of the problem? And how do I feel about that? And I think, again, I haven't really reached a conclusion, because I'm still using the tools, even though I've read the research and I see that, they're not just coming for anyone's jobs, they're coming for the jobs that, especially in my industry of tech, have historically gone to people who look like me. So yeah, I feel very, very conflicted. And I think that one of the things that I'm also really fearful of when you say empathy, and it kind of links back to the point you were saying around diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. Like, if I understand what you were saying that there are people who felt left out of that conversation, whether that was intentionally or not. People in positions of power, people from dominant groups, didn't feel included in DEI. And in a really similar way, I feel we already had a digital skills gap just with the internet and social media, and the move from offline customer experiences to online customer experiences. We've already had a huge gap there. And now we have an automation gap, where you have people who know how to use AI tools and people who don't know how to use AI tools. And I fear for the people who don't know how to use these tools and who feel intimidated by these tools, because it's like we're just creating like different layers of society. And that's never worked out very well in the history of humanity.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always going to come to things from like a very positive place, and like a problem solving place, because I feel like my entire career came about because I had to find a way to like work in a world that was not going to wait for me to figure out how to do it, quote unquote, in the system, right?
Mm,
Like, I knew that like with, my speech impediment, and, how I felt about like going to interviews and all of that stuff, like I knew that I was going to have a much more challenging time trying to do the kind of work that like I wanted to do if I was competing against other people who were just a lot more confident than I was in those kinds of situations. And so I've always viewed automation, well, always. So I guess like over the past couple of years, like as just like a really cool opportunity to sort of be like a good collaborator, right? Like it's going to like help me to build things faster. It's going to show me, how I can create even better content, right? Like, but you have brought up a lot of really good points here, in that, you know, I've only thought about it in terms of, how it's impacting like my life and my friends' life and my colleagues' lives. I didn't even think about, how it is impacting like carbon footprints and like the systems like that it's built on and all of that. And so, I I mean, is there empathy in automation? I think that there could be, but I think that we as people don't always go first to trying to like keep people first, right?
Mm,
Like we are, only trying to sort of elevate the people who we see ourselves in. And it's hard to see yourself in a person who is, very far away, who's like doing kind of work that you view as, beneath you, even though that is a completely horrific thing to think and say, right?
mm.
So yeah, I kind of, I don't know, like I think that the only way that we're going to like be successful as people with, this highly tech, worlds that we are in is if we continue to sort of keep people first. How do we do that? We do that with empathy. But, I wouldn't have a job if people or you wouldn't have a job either if this was easy for people to sort of fall back on when they feel like overtaken by tech or overtaken by other people who, could potentially take their jobs because, they don't know how to like work within the system itself. I don't know. I just think it's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one of the things that humans historically have struggled to solve is putting the right incentives in place. And I think
Mhm.
what's happening now, because of the geopolitical environment we're in 2025, because of the economic environment that we're in, people are trying to do more with less. And there's just like a general scarcity mindset running through the collective consciousness right now, where people are like land grabbing, power grabbing, money grabbing, profit seeking.
Mhm.
And I feel that automation in that mindset, like in that perspective, is valued as a time saving tool, as a money saving tool, right? Because the way you use a tool is like shaped by the problem that you have. And for a lot of businesses, the problem is we need to make more money. And I
Yeah.
think, I think, in every organization, of course, it's a lot more complicated than that, right? Like, the CEO has conflicting incentives. They need to make the shareholders happy, the board happy. They need to make their team happy. They need to protect the profits. They need to protect the mission. They need to protect the values. And I think this is why, to me, incentives are so interesting, and like unpacking them and understanding them. And this is in a way also where the work of empathy starts, right? Like, to understand what someone is going through, what someone is dealing with, you need to understand like what they're facing, what they're struggling with, what have you been hired to do, how is your performance going to be judged. And there are a lot of people right now who are probably, let's say, managers, being told, how are you going to bring AI into this business, right? And that question is also, linked to, who are you going to let go when we successfully bring AI into this business? And these are impossible questions to ask someone, because if you're a manager, you love your team, you support your team, everyone's doing great work, you want to have empathy for them and the hard work that they do. But if you're being encouraged to find an AI solution that is cheaper or more scalable, it's an impossible question. And don't get me wrong, we're already seeing a lot of companies U-turning on AI outsourcing. A lot of companies tried to outsource customer support to AI until they realized they were giving away too many refunds or getting too many complaints. And then they were like, let's bring the humans back in. So it's not a perfect system. But yeah, I definitely think it's like a super, super complex conversation. And we're in many ways just at the beginning of it. Like, if you look at jobs boards, not just tech, all corporate jobs boards, and just type in AI or automation, it's really interesting to see the jobs that come up. In some organizations, they're looking for chief automation officers. They want somebody who can come in with a consultant lens, engineering background, and analyze the whole organization top to bottom and work out where automation opportunities lie. There are other companies who are looking for responsible AI leaders who can come in and make sure that the applications of AI are ethically responsible and aligned with their mission and aligned with their values. So I do feel sometimes that we're at the beginning of this new age and it unfolds so quickly and so rapidly. We can only, we can only imagine what opportunities are also going to be created in this world of automation.
Hmm. So when we're thinking about the future, right? Like, because, like you said, we are at the very beginning of what, we can and cannot do, like with these, you know, brand new tools. And so we, don't know what it's going to take away concretely. However, like you said, we don't know what it's going to create as a result of this like entire new like industry, like being sort of uh, created as well. So like what's the role of um, leaders in ensuring automation is going to be built, created, and scaled with empathy and with 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 equity.
I think that's a fantastic question. And I'm sure that is something so many leaders are thinking about. And I mean leader in the broadest sense, not just someone who manages an
Mhm.
organization or a team, but even someone who's just showing up as a role model, like a teacher in a classroom or a parent in a household. I think there are so many people who are leaders in their lives, even if they don't have a job title that reflects that. And I think thinking about how to lead in this new age of automation in a way that feels equitable and empathetic, so that all of your actions, your words, your behaviors are kind to the people around you, no matter how diverse that community is. I think that's huge. I mean, I think the first step, right, like, is knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know, right? There are a lot of people who, like, right here in this moment are probably even like, what were those tools she mentioned? Because I only know Chat GPT or whatever. So I think the first thing is, wherever you are on your own, automation journey, I think having confidence in, like, what you use, what you know. And you don't need to be using every tool, but you should ideally, like, have a sense of the landscape, what's out there. And
Mhm.
most of this conversation has focused on, like, generative AI, but there are so many other ways that automation is being applied in the workplace, from tools like Zapier or whatever. Like, just having a sense of what's in the landscape, what's available to you, voice assistants, etc. I think is, like, really, really important. So, like, what actually does automation mean, and how does it apply to the things that I do, the things I care about, my industry? I think that's the first step. And then the second step is to, like, accept that you won't always know everything, and that's okay. Like, just try and understand what feels most relevant or important to you, like the most useful applications of it. And then maybe, like, follow Sharon's content, or, like, find a few other cool podcasts or blogs or YouTube channels. Like, find a voice that speaks about automation in a way that feels relevant and accessible to you, and, like, make yourself a promise to, like, stay on top of that. And then when it comes to that, equity piece and that inclusivity piece, like, how can you make sure that no one in your community, no one that you are in connection with or responsible for, feels left out of this conversation, feels left out of this journey? I think that first starts with, like, that reminder of who's in your community, right? Like you said
Mhm.
earlier, a lot of us are very focused on the people who are like us. And that is a heuristic. That's just a mental shortcut. It's our affinity bias at play. People like to mentor people who remind them of themselves, and to hire people who remind them of themselves. And we are more sensitive and empathetic to people who remind us of ourselves, and because that's where we apply our attention and our curiosity. And we give less empathy and curiosity to people who are more different. So I think, even just holding that as a reminder, like, remember to check my bias, I think will be really powerful. And check how bias could be affecting who I'm including in this conversation, and who I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about integrating automation into how we work more.
So, sort of like in the same like wheelhouse as bias here,
Mm,
we a lot of the times like we hear that algorithms are like completely neutral. From your perspective, what's dangerous about that idea?
I think, we're really lucky to have shows like, what was it, the Coded Bias documentary on Netflix, Algorithmic Justice League, Dr. Joy Buolamwini work. And, books like Invisible Women come out, Mother of Invention. I'm just naming
Mhm.
all of the amazing pieces of content where people are talking about how bias has shaped the world that we live in. And what I think was really interesting about Invisible Women, as an example, is that it reminded us that data sets are biased too. And I mean, I only learned this year that the fallopian tube, which is part of a women's sexual anatomy, they connect what like our womb and our our womb to our ovaries.
Yeah,
The fallopian tube is named after a guy who discovered it, an Italian man who discovered it, and he
of
was like, "I'm going to
course.
name this after myself." And as a woman, I just find that absolutely absurd. That like the anatomical reference for a part of my body is like a man's name. He doesn't even have one, and he never did. But the reason I mention
Mhm,
this is because data isn't perfect and data isn't neutral, right? Data isn't neutral, data isn't innocent. Like we know that individuals conduct studies, they choose who participates in the studies, they choose how they interpret the results of these studies, and they pump them into the AI models and agents that we're querying. And there have been numerous examples online of people typing in, show me a tech CEO, show me a tech CEO, show me a tech leader, show me a business leader, and just getting white man after white man after white man, and then doing a prompt like, yeah, show me like a cheat, show me a criminal, and finally seeing a person of color. And so, what does
mhm,
that tell us about the data that we feed into these systems and how they reflect our own biases? So, yeah, I definitely think the danger is that everything we create will be in our image, and you just need to scan the world section of your newspaper today to know that our world is a very violent, senseless place sometimes, at the best of
mhm.
times. Look at all the conflicts that are happening. Look at the humanitarian crises unfolding in Gaza, in Sudan. Like, these are preventable crises that yet are unfolding and costing innocent people, women and children, their lives every day. So, we're so quick to demonize weapons. There's AI weapons, they exist. They're being used by various militaries, and we're very quick to demonize them and villainize them, but we're less eager to turn the mirror on ourselves as the creators of these tools and these weapons, and as the perpetuators of violence and injustice. So yeah, like, I think the dangers are ultimately the dangers we all know too well, because they are the dangers that we create, have historically created, and continue to make today.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I feel like this also goes back to, the kinds of teams who are creating these products. A lot of the times, like, these products don't um, include everyone who is going to be using them,
Yeah.
because the teams don't include every type of person who is going to be using that product. And so, like,
Yeah.
a lot of these teams just like don't have the perspective just of like, even just like a person of color, or a
Mm,
queer person, or even just like a woman's, right, perspective. And then a lot of the times I think that a lot of these people, I feel like, just don't have like a lot of foresight, and like that could bring in, like, okay, well, like, now if there was a person on this team who was a little bit older, and who was
mm,
just like, had a little bit more experience just in seeing what people are capable of if they get
mm,
their hands on, like, a new kind of tool, like, then I feel like a lot of the problems that, we are, you know, constantly dealing with, these kinds of products, and, how they are oftentimes used for a little bit more harm than good. A lot of those problems could probably be avoided. And so, in your opinion, like, how do issues like representation and like inclusion
Mm.
show up in the design and creation of automated systems?
It's really interesting because I remember what there was a tech founder. I think it was DHH. I think it was like the inventor of Basecamp products and Ruby on Rails programming
Mhm,
language a few years ago. Started a Twitter thread about applying for an Apple credit card. So this is a few years ago when Apple released their credit card, and they were using an algorithm to determine whether or not applicants would be successful and receive a credit line. So they weren't humans assessing these; they had just built an algorithm that assessed the application criteria. And he was in uproar because he and his wife applied at the same time, and his wife actually earns more money than him, and he put this out in the Twitter thread, but her application was denied and his application was not. And the only differentiating factor, they live at the same address, they're both working, blah blah blah, he could think of was gender. He was like, it
mhm,
must have rejected her, because of her gender. And I think so often when engineers and product designers are making products, they're only testing it for themselves, right? Or that image of themselves. They're forgetting about this whole other user base, this whole other group of people who it doesn't work for. And there can be like real material consequences of this. Like, a very famous example is like the fact that the crash test dummy was always 6 foot and like 250 pounds. And someone was like, well, what happens if someone a lot smaller is in a car crash? Are these airbags going to work? Are these safety precautions going to work? Same thing happened with like heart stents. They were designed again for a male heart, which on average, broadly speaking, is a lot larger. So I definitely think like there are like real life applications and problems when we forget about representation in design, and we forget about like who's at the table. And we've also seen it go really, really wrong. So, I mean, I'm sure you remember
mhm,
when Google's image generator was like, we're going to try and build the most inclusive image generator. Like, it ended up making black Nazis and brown Vikings. And people were like, okay, now it's gone too far. But I think, again, like what that example shows is just the need for an authentic person with that experience in the room. If you said to me now, hey, Abadesi, you like typography and fonts, design a font for dyslexic people. What would I know about that? I'm not dyslexic. I'm seeing letters in the way that most people see letters. I don't have an issue putting them in order, processing them. If you want someone to design you an amazing dyslexic font, you need to ask a dyslexic person so that they can actually look at it and go, oh yeah, that one looks a lot better than that. And the same thing goes with any type of disability or any type of need. You need the people who have that lived experience to inform you on the usefulness, the effectiveness, the value of that. But there's always a reluctance to ask, and I don't know what drives that. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but why is there always this assumption that, I know best, I'm the engineer, I know best, I'm the designer, I know best, I don't need to ask anyone else? I don't know where you think this is coming from.
I mean, honestly, okay, so I have seen this a lot, like with just a lot of software developers. Like, there's this sort of like engineering god complex of like, well, I create the tools, so like I know what's best. Like, but the issue there is that, like, yes, you are creating these tools. Like, I have never written a line of code in my life. I've tried it. It's not for me, right? And I have like a lot of r- respect for people who are like super into it, and they are creating these like really cool things. Um, like, but a lot of the times, these products are failing because of all of the quote unquote soft skills, right? Like communication, sales, um, not having the correct marketing, right? Like all of those things have to be in place in order to like get your product in front of the right people, right?
Mm,
And then, you know, and then, like, if you do get your product in front of the right people, if your product is created by a team that only has one or two type of people on it, well, then you are alienating a very large part of your potential customer base, right?
yeah.
And so I think it's hard for people, especially people in those highly technical roles, to accept that, like, yeah, you know, I have a blind spot, or like, yeah, like I need a little bit more assistance. And I think that just comes from the fact of like, you know, a lot of us as people have a really hard time asking for help,
Mm,
especially if we are like really accustomed to like solving problems on our own, and, you know, highly technically skilled people are like the most intense of problem solvers, right? And they are incredibly intelligent. And so, of course, like they're like, well, I don't need any help,
mm,
because like every problem like that has ever been presented to me, I have solved. And so, yeah,
mm,
I mean, I think it's really like hard to include a lot of people, you know, when we are creating these products, because of just, you know, how we are as people and how our brains work, right? Yeah, I mean, like if you have like 10 incredibly smart people in a room and they all think, no, like I'm the smartest, I'm going to be able to solve this problem, they're probably
mm,
going to have a difficult time working together, right? And like a
yeah.
difficult time just like talking to each other and
Mm,
hearing like where other people are coming from, as opposed to like when you have like 10, you know, above average intelligence people who are like, well, I know that I'm not the smartest person, and so I'm going to have to rely more on communication, on collaboration. You know, those people are probably going to be a little bit more successful, like, but they are more prone to having everybody at a table. And so that sort of brings me to, you know, it's hard to have every single different type of person, you know, at the table when we are creating products and selling them and all of that stuff. But, you know, in your opinion, who should be at the table when we are building automated systems, and who do you think is often left out of
that's a
those
great
conversations?
question. Um, it's when you were speaking, I was thinking of this quote that I always tell my team, which is assumptions are dangerous. And
Mhm.
I think assumptions are dangerous because the minute you start assuming you know what someone needs or someone wants is the beginning of you failing them. And we've done this with customers, we've done this with clients. Oh, I just assumed they wanted a morning session instead of an afternoon workshop. And it's like, why did you assume that? Or I just assumed they wanted to meet on Zoom and not Teams. It's like, well, why? Why did you assume that? Like your assumption has now created an inconvenience, and that inconvenience impacts trust and productivity. And, you know, automation is going to be like um, another tool like word processing, right? There was a time when
Mm.
people had to learn word processing. I'm old enough to remember when we used to have to do speed typing tests. Do you remember speed typing
I
tests?
do. Yes, I
I
remember that.
like, ooh, the fox jumped over the wall, whatever.
Yeah.
So when you ask this question of like, who needs to be at the table, you're kind of asking me like, who needs to be at the table when we design how we eat, how we sleep. Automation is who needs to be at the table when we design how we work. So my answer is whoever's working, whoever is gonna be working needs to be at that table. Are you young? Come along. Are you old? Come along. Are you tall? Are you short? Do you have fingers? Do you not have fingers? Like, can you see? Can you not see? can you not hear? Like, if you are going to be working, which quite frankly
Hmm.
is most of
Everybody.
us, right?
Yeah.
And we all need to put food in our mouth, roof over our heads, etc. Then you need to be a part of this conversation, because automation is it's the toolkit, it's the backbone for every connection and interaction and task of the future. It's already here, it's already happening, it's not going anywhere. So you know there are people today who still don't have smartphones, right? And there are some people who had smartphones and don't have smartphones. And if you don't have a device that can access the internet, you might not have a smartphone, maybe you have a computer, maybe you have an iPad. If you don't have a device that can access the internet, you are already being locked out of banking services, healthcare services, updates from your local council. I was at my local surgery, so I live in London, and we have public healthcare. I was at my local surgery, and an older gentleman wanted to book an appointment, and the receptionist said, "You need to do it on the website." And he said, "But I'm here now, so can I just book my appointment now?" And she said, "No, because I can't book it for you. Like, the only way to book is to go on the website." And he could not fathom, right? He was like, "I don't understand. I am here now. Let me just book the appointment." And the reason I'm saying this is because automation is that next wave of things. It's not going anywhere. So if we want it to be useful and effective, then we need to make sure that everyone can be a part in its development.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I 100% agree, right? Because like we are all going to be using this one day, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of us are like already using it and have already been using it, and we just had like no idea until we gave it names and we,
Yeah.
right? Like it is a part of our lives, and it's going to continue to grow and become like a bigger part of our lives. My fear is that we're never going to include every single person in this process, which it is, to be fair, very challenging to do that. However, the kinds of companies that are creating these products are getting insane amounts of funding, and they're also going to be making tons and tons and tons and tons of money. I feel like if they really cared about how this is going to impact all of us, and how we should be keeping people first, then they would be a lot more careful about the teams creating these products that so many of us are going to be using. But I just don't know where their heads are at at the moment. But I don't know.
Yeah, I think
It's a
that's
little
a fair
scary.
point. I think there's so many different like elements of the journey. Like, we know that automation is transforming, education, and it's also really transforming early
Mhm.
careers. And I actually was invited to a recruitment conference recently here in London. It was at the Globe Theatre, this amazing organization Amberjack, and they were like, "Can you talk to us about how to build loyalty with graduates and early careers professionals?" Because they're all tech whizzes, so they're applying for hundreds and hundreds of jobs using AI automation tools that make it so much easier for them to write a cover letter, update their resume, send out something, and then they're not even showing up for interviews, and they're not even showing up for the jobs that they've been offered. And it's like this whole new landscape of job hunting that we have no experience with, and we want to know what we can do. And I was like, you're seeing all of these applications of automation and AI and like these ways of leveraging these tools as like a bad thing because it's creating more work for you, but you're not seeing the opportunity, which is you have this like super energized group of young people who have always had the internet. They have always had the internet, which means they're really, really good at it, and they're really good at typing, and they're really good at processing information, and they want things quick and snappy and like bite size. And I was like, this is the future. And stop trying to make them step into your past ways of working, and instead like surrender to the present and start building and adapting to the future now. But it's like a really like tough pill to swallow for a
Mhm.
lot of people. And yeah, I think, like you said, a lot of us have been automating things without even knowing that that's what we were doing, or we've been using AI without knowing that's what we're doing, or interacting with an algorithm or benefiting from algorithms without realizing that that's what we're doing. And I think it's just really important, for anyone who's watching or anyone who's listening, to not be intimidated by this conversation and not be intimidated by this change, but instead say, what's the opportunity that comes with this change, and how can I get excited about it? Because humans don't like change, we fear it, but it's also like the only inevitability we face. So, to your point of like being optimistic and being hopeful, I hope a conversation like this can also make people feel really excited. Like, okay, well, like, what are going to be some of those benefits that I get out of this automation journey that the workplace is on, whether that's saving time, whether that's learning things, or whether that's you know opportunities to expand skill sets, expand responsibilities. I hope people can find positive.
Yeah, I'm always of the mindset of like, look, like if you have to be in this world, which is not an easy place to live, I have an incredibly privileged life, incredibly, and my life is hard. So there are people out there who do not have even 1/10 as much as I do, and their lives are way, 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 way harder than mine. But, we're all sort of like on this planet. We're all, here. We should try to be as positive as possible. And when we look at the future, we should find a thing that we can be excited about, right? Because like what's going to get you out of that every day? It isn't going to
Mhm.
be like, well, I have to go and do the same thing again. I have to send this email, I have to do this, I have to do that. No, it's things that are going to give you a little bit of hope, things that give you joy. So like what gives you hope about the future of tech in general? And what do you think the role that empathy can play in shaping that is?
I think that there are so many opportunities on the horizon to like lean into creativity and the natural artist that is within everyone, and I mean that like in the broadest sense. And I think empathy ultimately invites us to connect with our emotions, right? Like it invites us to
Mhm.
connect with kindness and compassion. If someone's afraid, it invites us to, acknowledge that fear. If someone's excited, it invites us to acknowledge that excitement. And so what makes me really excited about the future is, emotions are something that are like inherently human, and we don't really model them into AI because it's just a waste of energy, and it's a waste of, back to that carbon footprint conversation. Like we don't need our AI to start throwing tantrums at us because we're querying it for the 1000th time that day. So I think there's this really exciting opportunity, coming out of burnout culture, hustle culture. There's like a real opportunity for us as a civilization to reflect on what makes us unique, um, on the positive side, right? Not the negative side. What makes us unique, and really, really lean into that. So I do think we're going to see a real creative boom, across all the creative sectors. Um, I know a lot of people are like worried about how AI will impact writers and artists, and I think there is a very valid conversation happening around copyrighted material and how AI companies, exploit that with no pay to the artist. And I think that is like, and creators. And I think that's a very, very fair conversation to have. I did not use the Studio Ghibli generator for that very reason, because I was just like, I'm not jumping on this bandwagon. I have like conflicted views about that. But yeah, staying positive. I do think there will also be almost like a real need for us to decide, like, what can we do that, you know, algorithms cannot, that computers
Mhm.
cannot. And that's a really exciting question to explore, and I hope it brings us closer to each other, and connects us more deeply across borders, across boundaries, across different experiences. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
What about
So
you?
oh my gosh. What gives me hope about the
Yeah.
future of tech? You know what? I've always loved this industry.
Mm,
I am not saying it's perfect by
mm,
any means, but I've always just loved how, even for all of its failures, there's just this constant craving of creation, right? And
yeah,
so there always are, like I should say, are, always just trying to push the boundaries, right? And like we're trying to see, like what more that we could do. And that creativity, I mean, it extends to like, is it a feature or is it a bug? Wait, it's a
nice,
bug, but it's also a feature, right? And
nice.
so I feel like a lot of the times we sort of, we as people can like always go back to like, you know, everything is hard, everything is impossible, I can't do this, I can't do that. But I love that this industry always finds a way to sort of say like, okay, well, I can't do it this way, but how about I try it another way?
Mm,
And like at the core of that is just us like being people, right? Like us, using our sort of adaptability, like as people who have experiences, who are like having conversations with other people, to, continue to be creative and thoughtful and to, grow and evolve products and services, as we as people, are growing and evolving. So I think that that's what gives me the most hope is that, at the end of the day, we are just people who are trying to, make really cool products and like make cool services that are going to make other people's lives better. And we're doing it creatively. And that's always going to be like my like, yeah, like all of this is worth it because we're
mm.
all really just trying to make other people's lives better.
I like
That's
that.
sort of my view. Yeah.
Mm.
Again, I'm always trying to find the positive in things because, we got to be positive.
We need
So
it.
we need it, right? So to close it out here, if someone today is building anything, right? Like a product or a service or policy, like that touches other people's lives. And I think that that covers almost everyone on the planet who,
Yeah.
a person who works. What's one reminder you hope that they are going to carry with them from this conversation?
Well, hopefully my assumptions are dangerous line, right? Like, I think if
Mhm.
you are building or supporting or managing someone who doesn't share your lived experiences, who doesn't share your level of experience, who doesn't share, all the list of things that shape how you make decisions and how you show up, don't make assumptions of them. Invite them into a conversation, design a survey, design a feedback form, design a questionnaire, have a conversation, do a virtual coffee, do an IRL lunch date, but really try to get that primary, from the source data that will
Yeah.
help you design your policy, design your product. And I know what you're thinking, who has time for that? The thing is, right, we discount present time more than, like, future time, or in the sense that we don't want to spend the time now, but it will create a problem down the line and take up our time anyway. So, prevent it by just having those real conversations with all the different stakeholders. Unless you're building something literally for someone exactly like you. If you're building something for someone exactly like you and you don't care if different types of people can use it, fine. But that is like hardly anyone these days.
Yeah. For sure. I love that. Assumptions are dangerous. I think that is such an excellent piece of advice, and I'm taking that one with me for sure. It has been such a pleasure to talk to you, Abadesi. You are so
Thank you.
delightful. Where can people find you?
Oh, well, it's been such a pleasure to chat with you. And yeah, keep all the great content coming. I love your LinkedIn and all your emails. So yeah, I
Thank
feel very
you.
fortunate. Please check out my podcast, Tech-ish. It's myself and my co-host Michael, who runs People of Color in Tech, a fantastic media platform. You can also check me out on LinkedIn. I post there just like Sharon. Just find Abadesi. I'm the only one. I'm also on Instagram. And yeah, if you are interested to hear more about Hustle Crew and the training that we do for teams, check out hustlecrew.co.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. It's been an insightful conversation. You are so brilliant and wonderful, and this has been awesome. And for everybody else, I will see you guys next week.
Thanks, Sharon.